Recently, we had an opportunity to lead an African Muslim to Christ in an apartment complex, and it was pretty amazing because we had been praying for God to raise up a leader among this ethnic group. There were no known believers among them. And so we got connected through a local refugee organization and got connected to this young man, and we started sharing Christ with him. We were using creation to Christ as a storying method to help him understand the garden through the prophets all the way up to Jesus the Messiah. And so we got to a point with this man where we invited him to enter the kingdom, and he said yes. We were working with an Arabic language translator who was actually a Muslim and not a Christian. And the Muslim tried to lead him in the Muslim Shahada confession of Muhammad rather than leading him into a confession of Jesus as Savior and Lord. And so there was massive spiritual warfare surrounding him coming into the kingdom. Fortunately, there was somebody there to catch that, and they rebuked the interpreter, and he was able to come to Christ. Then we began to disciple him, and what we did is we started helping him. When we would share a story with him, we would have him repeat that story back to us, and then we would say, Khalid, who are you working with? Who's at your job? And he would list people he knew that were far from God, that were also Muslims before he had come to Christ. And so we would say, can you share the story with them? And he would say, yes. Well, he began to share the story. Every time we would go to his house, we would tell him a story. He would practice telling that story back to us, and then we would pray for his lost friends. Then he would go and share that story with them. Immediately, more spiritual warfare happened, and he met a friend that started taking him to bars with him, and then he wanted to divorce his wife and reconvert back to Islam. And we had to go back and share Christ with him again and remind him of the commitment he had made, and he repented and made a decision again to follow Jesus, and then he's been going ever since telling that story. I share that story because that is really at heart where multiplication happens. Multiplication happens when people are willing to endure persecution, suffering, spiritual warfare, and keep their focus on sharing their story and Jesus' story, come what may, following God and fishing. Now, every time that we lead somebody to Christ, every time somebody makes a decision to follow Jesus and fish for people, if they will do that, lead people to Christ, and those disciples will become disciple makers, and they're focused on not just following God in a small group, but fishing for people. That's how you get multiplication. And so we have seen that starting to happen, just the birth of it in our context, and it's been beautiful to watch. The most important thing to understand about multiplication is it's a movement of God. And it's a partnership between God and all of his people, not just ordained clergy, not just people who are really good at teaching or at sharing the gospel. Movements start with everybody. Anybody can be a catalyst. Anybody can go out and share the gospel. Anybody can make friends and tell people how they came to Christ. And what happens is, if everybody will begin to take a hold of that, if everyone will begin to catch that vision and say, okay, I'm not only going to own my faith, but I'm going to take my faith to the streets. And I'm going to start talking to people as I can, my family, my coworkers, and then maybe if everybody I know is people just like me, maybe I'll start knocking on doors, or maybe I'll go to a strip mall and I'll start going to business and talking to people and introducing myself and meeting new people and at least giving people a shot to enter the kingdom. That's where you see multiplication happens. And all it takes is one person or a few people to catch that vision, but as they lead people to Christ, then those disciples catch that vision and they go out and lead people to Christ. Then you're going to reach entire population segments, entire zip codes, entire cities, regions of states, nations, until the Great Commission task is complete, where every single ethno-linguistic group has disciple-making disciples. And so that's what we see with multiplication, is not just a few things getting started, a few churches started, a few Bible studies started, a few people getting saved. We want to see movements, multiplication. And the most key element to that is seeing people who have come to Christ immediately joining us in the mission.